think we believe every infantryman in the United States Army will carry a drone with them into battle. When you have a swarm of 1,000 drones coming at you, a mere human brain can no longer keep up with that threat.
Hello, and welcome to The Conversation. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico's White House Bureau Chief, and every week on this show, I invite one of the most compelling and sometimes unexpected power players in Washington and beyond in for a chat to find out how they're navigating and shaping this incredible era of American politics. And this week, there's a lot to talk about, but I want to zero in on the little topic of war and peace, which of course has been a major focus for the president. Sources are telling me that the White House is planning to unveil a peace agreement that could end the war in Ukraine very soon. But this comes as Russia has recently stepped up its missile and drone strikes against civilian targets, while Ukraine and its allies are coming up with new ways to keep up. And my guest this week just became the highest level administration official to visit Kyiv just days after our interview. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll made an unannounced trip there for high-level talks with Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky, as news broke that a potential peace deal could be on the horizon. Now, Driscoll is an Iraq War veteran and knows firsthand how the decisions made in the rooms of the Pentagon impact real soldiers on the ground. He's made it his mission to transform the U.S. Army and the Pentagon from a, quote, calcified bureaucracy to an institution that moves faster, spends less, and maybe looks more like the private sector. I caught up with Driscoll at the Pentagon, where we talked about the future of warfare and how he plans to transform the Army to keep up and why he thinks war drives innovation. Here's my conversation with Army Secretary Dan Driscoll. And a quick warning, this episode does mention suicide. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you for being here.
I want to start with one of your spicier quotes I heard recently. You said you felt like a mix of a Southern Baptist preacher and a jihadist in your first months because you wanted to, quote, tear the temple down. What about the state of the Army inspired such a colorful metaphor from you?
Well, just to reflect on that metaphor, I used it a couple of times domestically, and then I used it once in the Middle East, and I can commit to you that it was not the right...
Did not go over quite.
Not the right setting for that metaphor, so I have since kind of paced it back. But I think when you get in here and you see the lowercase c corruption in the systems, and you see how much money is spent, this is like noble activities that are being done with taxpayer dollars, and the outputs are so bad for soldiers and so bad for their families. And then you start to dig in and you find out it's been going on for 30 and 40 years, and soldiers have just had to be numb to this idea that when they put on their uniform, they go back in time technologically 20 or 30 years.
In the most powerful country in the world.
In the most powerful country in the world that spends almost $1 trillion on defense. We, the Army, spend almost $200 billion a year, have over 1 million people, and our outputs were so bad that it's just enraging. As somebody who was in the Army for 3.5 years, whose dad was in the Army, whose granddad was in the Army, whose nephew is currently in the Army, my kids want to join the Army. These are my friends and my family that are having to suffer from this. And so it truly went through like different stages of rage.
You describe the Pentagon as a calcified bureaucracy and the Army as an institution that needs to move a whole lot faster than it has. What are some of the things you're doing to change that?
So a couple of months in with General Randy George, our Chief of Staff of the Army, we did the Army Transformation Initiative, ATI. The Army has to use acronyms for everything.
Of course.
But
I'm learning that.
Yeah, that's our
thing.
And it was four core things. We cut $48 billion in expected future spending.
You're cutting.
We are cutting. So over the next 5 years, $48 billion. And we can go into how annoyed this has made people. But where they thought they were going to get the dollars, we said, no more, we're not going to do it. We are going to spend those $48 billion on the things we need to transform, like creating a digital layer that can exchange information, on all of the things you need for modern warfare. So bucket one was the cut. Bucket two, spend on the things we need. Bucket three, there were all sorts of things we were doing as an Army that were sinful. So we had given away our right to repair our own equipment. So you would travel to bases and you would see these multi-million-dollar platforms sitting on the sideline for more than a year for something we could 3D print for under $10. And we knew how to 3D print it. We could go to a weld shop and fix it, and we had just accepted it. We demanded that on all contracts going forward, we had our right to repair. And then the fourth bucket was we we just have too many people in our headquarters. And so we basically said we have got to get soldiers back out to the field. Our most recent bucket of actions, and I promise I'll be quick, are the way that we think you can fix a lot of these problems and to break through the calcification is by bringing in outside experts, by bringing in private companies, by bringing in private investors. Take what they've been doing really well for 20 and 30 years and just do it here. Just be a slow follower. We don't even have to innovate on a lot of these things. And so we've spent the last couple of months trying to host those conversations and kick off actual projects.
You have said that drones, talking about catching up, have completely changed the game, calling it the Silicon Valley of war. But I have heard from current and former military officials that we are pretty far behind technologically because of all of the reasons that you just listed. Just how far behind are we in your assessment?
So to level set, I think every nation in the entire world, except perhaps Ukraine and Russia and maybe the Israelis, are behind. And the reason they are behind is all of those nations are in a moment of conflict that is forcing them to innovate at speeds that are unnatural for bureaucracies. But there is such an existential threat for those countries.
Conflict causes creativity,
100%.
Right?
And so nearly everyone in the world has to be a fast follower. What's amazing about the United States of America is we have the most talented tech innovators at scale of anywhere in human history. And so what we believe we have to do to catch up really quickly is to empower those innovators in Silicon Valley, on the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Midwest to come bring us what they have and to buy it really early on and get it to the hands of our soldiers. Because what we've done so wrong for so long is we create these requirements guessing what we are going to need in the future. And by the time we output the thing we thought we might need, it's already outdated. We probably got the requirements wrong on the front end, and it costs way too much. The way to fix it is just invite in America's innovators, take their products, give them to the hands of soldiers to test these minimally viable products, and then learn, does it work? What needs to be changed on it? Pass that feedback back to the company. And then when something is really good and soldiers love it, go buy a lot of it. And so for drones and counter drones and everything we're doing there, I'm actually really optimistic that in 6 to 9 months, our nation will look completely different with our posture.
We've got generative AI in the decision loop, autonomous drones, machine speed targeting. Are we headed for a world where traditional human warfare is obsolete or outmatched altogether?
I don't think anybody knows. I think the best guess is if the United States entered a conflict with a peer in a couple of years, it would be a hybrid war where nearly every human being on the battlefield would be empowered and enabled with a digital tool. I think we believe every infantryman in the United States Army will carry a drone with them into battle. Every single command and control node will need some sort of counter-drone defense. You will need a data layer that is basically able to connect our people and our things and our sensors to exchange information in near real time, because without that data layer, generative AI can't help you. When you have a swarm of 1,000 drones coming at you, a mere human brain can no longer keep up with that threat, especially when you start to layer in things like the border where there may be airports nearby, and just the contested and congested environments with which humans will have to make decisions at just paces that the brain can't keep up will require digital layers exchanging information.
Fascinating. So you're saying in 2 years.
Yep.
What about 10 years from now? Crystal ball a little bit here. What does warfare look like?
So what makes warfare so complicated is the more serious the conflict, the more very boring things like logistics start to matter. Because most nations, when they have the peace dividend, meaning when they have the extra dollars sitting in their federal accounts, don't want to spend it on defense at scale. So they spend enough so that they can enter a conflict for some period of time, kick on their manufacturing base, and build the things that they will need for long-term war. And so if you take that and you kind of pin it in your brain, and then you say the other problem with war is many of the most exquisite functions and features of a society are the very first thing that the enemy will attack. And so war has historically knocked people back decades oftentimes in the technology that they're required to use. And so if you thought of all of the amazing technology that exists today and you wanted to create an army, as an example, that just had that, it would probably be a very bad idea, because you would probably be over-reliant on GPS satellites, you would probably be over-reliant on power grids, you would probably be over-reliant on all sorts of things that the enemy knows you're relying on, and it is the first thing they will attack. And so when you are creating defensive and offensive solutions, you have to think even 10 years out, when the war really gets to its most catastrophic moment, what are the very basic tools of warfare that can't be impacted by the enemy? And so all of this is to say, I still think it's a hybrid solution. I still think it's human beings paired with machines. And I think those machines may be a lot smarter and a lot more defensible, but it probably will be human-led for a very long time.
You're an Iraq War veteran. I think a lot of people would argue that the conflict really influenced how Americans see the U.S. military, especially military intervention abroad. As someone who actually served, how did that experience shape your views on U.S. military intervention?
I think if you talk to, and I don't intend to put words in their mouth, but Secretary of War Hegseth or Vice President Vance, or a lot of leaders who are serving today who deployed back in Iraq or Afghanistan, I think one of the most impactful things for all of us has been seeing the decisions that come from this five-sided building in D.C. and how it actually impacts soldiers on the ground in these faraway countries. And I can think of all of these examples where one of the most offensive to me was we were going to do an IED factory raid, and they had given me 2 platoons, and we did all the planning, and they even sent in a film crew to record this. And we drove out, and we set up the cordon, and we got ready to go into this supposed IED factory, and we had the bolt cutters ready, and we called up for permission, and they said the rules of engagement had changed, and you were no longer allowed to cut locks on buildings. And so this lock was the size that my 7-year-old uses on her gym locker. And we ended up packing up and going back home. And that night I remember thinking, like, man, there are a lot of IEDs on these roads. Like, someone could have been killed or lost a limb. And no rational human being would ever have said that that was a good idea. But somehow in this just contorted decision-making body that is the Pentagon, to the actual soldiers on the ground who had to go execute the mission, it came out that way. And so I think there is a very healthy, cautious, confirmed twice when we receive information that I would imagine if we hadn't served in those conflicts, we wouldn't have had.
I do want to ask about some of the rare bipartisan pushback this administration has received on its actions toward Venezuela, specifically whether these strikes on boats in the Caribbean are legal and about the potential for this to escalate into a bigger conflict. You're the one responsible to prepare the Army in case we do escalate into something bigger. What do you make of the concerns from lawmakers, and what would it look like for the military to be involved here?
I think, as you referenced, my Title 10 authority with General George is to man, train, and equip an army that is ready to fight anywhere in the world. And with all of the changes in warfare that we've been discussing, that looks a lot like getting our soldiers experiences and technology and access to information so that whenever we send them anywhere, whether it's in the Western Hemisphere or the Indo-Pacific, they're ready for the fight. I think if you look at what had occurred in our country for the couple of years before the current administration, a lot of Americans were being harmed from things coming in over our own border. And I think people look past the triteness, perhaps, of how they view the remark that border security is national security. But it's like one of the most basic concepts of humanity that when you have a territory and a community, you want to defend your borders. And so the United States Army has been proud to serve on the southern border. I think the refocusing on defending the homeland makes all of the sense in the world, and it is the mandate that the president received in his election, because it had gotten so out of hand for so long. And so what I would say is the United States Army is transforming to be ready for any mission that it is sent on. And these are missions that the soldiers are proud to do to help make their homeland safer.
I mean, the border is locked down to an extent we haven't seen in a very long time under this administration. The next step now that we're seeing, talking about defending the homeland, is deploying National Guard troops in cities across America. The criticism of this move is that Trump is politicizing the armed forces by sending them into blue cities in particular. You've pushed back against this narrative, but do you think it's a problem for the military if Americans come to view it as a partisan entity?
This isn't to dismiss the seriousness or the genuineness of your question. I think these slippery slope arguments are hard in reality.
What do you mean by that?
I think if you take the National Guard as an example, I guess to go back even a step further in my time at Sec Army, I can remember with the Army's 250th parade coming up, the number of stories, I don't know the exact number, I would guess hundreds, that were written about perhaps the fact that the administration was having its military parade through D.C., was trying to send a bad signal to Democrats and trying to militarize our streets.
Well, I think it's different. The parade is one thing, right? I think it's another thing when people in blue cities see troops on the street and feel like they are being targeted.
I commit to trying to tie these two concepts together. And if I don't, call me out on
Okay,
it. So
I'll
this
give you the
isn't
time.
to lead you astray. But when the parade occurred, I remember stories about we may cause $15 to $20 million worth of damage, that there were, I think No King's Day was started as a counter protest to the parade, that by virtue of it falling on the president's birthday, that somehow the Army's founding 250 years ago could possibly have been correlated with that. And so there were all of these negative stories. And then the parade occurred. As far as I know, we had more people watch it than the Super Bowl, 144 million. We actually had our recruiting numbers go up. We caused, as far as I know, $800 worth of damage to one curb. And almost everybody I know on
That
the
poor
right,
curb.
I know the curb,
Unbelievable.
and almost everyone I know on the right and the left said it was a wholesome event and did a really good job of highlighting the Army, which is what I believe the president and we had said the entire time. Now to D.C. If I look at the D.C. National Guard and every experience that I have had with them, when I am out on the streets with them, when I am talking to the leadership of D.C. who may be from the other party, every single time they thank me for their service. They tell me to tell the soldiers how amazing they're doing. When you talk to the community members, my impression is at scale, they feel safer. And so it is not to say that something could have gone wrong or something in the future may go wrong, but it is to say everything I have seen to date, the crime has plummeted in DC, people feel safer, and the Guard are getting to participate in a righteous portion of their Title 32 duties, which is to make their own communities safer. And so all of this is to say, I actually think when it is done within the law, which is everything I have seen, it is a noble use of the National Guard.
My question more broadly is everything is getting politicized these days. So this is not an outlandish exception to people pointing to something that the president has done and saying it's politically motivated. Democrats serve in the military, Republicans serve in the military, people that have zero interest in politics and just want to provide for their family and serve the country serve in the military. How do you try to protect it from the politicization and try to keep it an apolitical body?
So this is a fantastic question and something General Randy George and I talk about all the time. And we talk about it more in a, how do we make these changes, whether it's with how we acquire things or how we train or how we interact with our communities, assuming we are doing something different and transforming and assuming we think it's good, how do we make it outlast us? I think the average Sec Army is only in this seat 23 months. And so how do we make these things last so it doesn't slip back into its old way? And what we have talked about is we oftentimes try to include people from all over the country and both parties. And so if you look at something like Right to Repair, I think it'll show up in the upcoming NDAA. It has pretty aggressive supports from some very unlikely characters on the far left and the far right.
Real quick, Right to Repair, brief explanation for civilians.
So Right to Repair, basically, it showed up a couple of years ago as it related to like John Deere tractors. As I recall, that instance was a tractor would go down, a farmer would need to get it back up, but the equipment manufacturer would have said, you don't have the right to fix your own stuff. You have to bring it to a dealer. As that manifests for the Army, we would have our couple $100,000 Humvees go down. We could 3D print a part for that or a Black Hawk, and we were unable to do that.
Yep.
Correct.
Got it.
And so what we are now saying is we, the Army, have just internally said, hey, we will not sign a contract that doesn't give us that right. They are working on legislation to make that a mandatory thing. But if you look at just the Senate, the people pushing that, who we are working with hand in glove with the Department of War and the White House, is Tim Sheehy and Elizabeth Warren. They wrote an op-ed on this on Fox News. Like, that is remarkable. That should protect the institution of the Army, the Pentagon, and these ideas that should outlast just this one administration. And so it's a very long-winded way of saying we are very cognizant of the idea that if we just do this in a way that is highly political, it may undermine the institution that has been here for 250 years, and it almost certainly will not last past the next couple of administrations if it swings back the other direction.
One of the things that threatens to make people view this entity, the Pentagon, the military, as political is some of the reporting around what's going on with generals and admirals. The New York Times is reporting that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has fired or sidelined at least 24 generals and admirals over the past 9 months. These are changes to the top ranks that could have a lasting impact, could outlast you guys, as you say. I know how much respect you have for the experience, the wisdom, and just the humanity of some of these leaders. Does it give you pause when we are losing this kind of talent and experience?
Just as I speak to the Army, because that's my experience and my family's experience, the Army is filled with an incredible number of talented leaders. And it's actually purpose built so that no one leader is necessary for the success of the institution. Like from its very core, if you just think about how warfare unfolds, the entire system is built from top to bottom that on a moment's notice, someone could fall in on the leadership position and do a great job. And that is very different, I think, from the private sector. And so I just want to acknowledge that kind of fundamental difference. But then I think to your other question, these are very hard conversations that I always try to look at what's the closest thing I can get to data of what's working or what's not working. And I think on this one, the data I would look to are kind of two things. One, our recruiting numbers, and two, our retention numbers. So our recruiting numbers, the story the U.S. Army is telling to possible recruits, are they willing to raise their right hand and maybe give their life to join an institution? Is it stable enough? Are the leaders good enough? Is it an excellent enough existence that they're willing to suffer all of the things that you have to suffer to be part of this body of excellence? Our numbers are off the charts. They're 15-year highs. Last year, we made our 12-month recruiting goal in 7 months. Equally important, and perhaps more important to me, is retention. So those are the soldiers that actually see their leadership. They get to see, am I doing a good job? Is General George doing a good job? Do they want to continue to serve in this entity? Do they want to continue to sacrifice on behalf of the American people? And our retention numbers are off the chart. So last year, in 6 months, we hit our 12-month recruiting goal. And so as far as I can tell from the quantitative data that I can see, what Secretary Hegseth is doing on behalf of the president is working. And the people that matter most, the American soldiers and those who are willing to go be that, are the voices that are telling me that every single day I look at the numbers.
So what is the rationale, though, as far as do you understand it? And I know that these decisions aren't all yours, but to sideline or get rid of some of these high-ranking officials?
I think a lot of it is just this concept of new blood. I mean, if you look, I'm a 39-year-old Secretary of the United States Army,
Fresh-faced.
the youngest, as far as I know, the youngest ever. And I don't know whether I'm doing a good job or not doing a good job. But I think what President Trump does uniquely well is he looks out and says, I'm going to pick unconventional candidates to go break through these 30 and 40-year calcified systems that exist all over the federal government. And the normal picks, the standard picks, are the ones that have oftentimes reinforced that. And I think Secretary Hegseth is just amplifying those kind of decision-making tendencies to pick new and different leaders to try to speed up change.
You talked about recruitment and retention. How are you guys doing with women? The secretary has questioned the role of women in the military, specifically in combat. Like, what's the morale like for the women in the Army and in terms of recruiting and retention?
So I'll give you qualitative and quantitative. So qualitatively, last week I was in Dahlonega, Georgia. I'd say the world's, or the Pentagon's, or perhaps the most factually true, is the Army's premier leadership school is Ranger School. It's divided into 3 phases. One is at Fort Benning, Georgia. The other is in the mountains of Georgia, Dahlonega, and the last is in the swamps of Florida. So I was at the second phase up in the mountains of Georgia on pretty steep terrain. We landed in, we did a patrol with some candidates who were trying to get what's called their Ranger tab. And we're walking, and the remarkable thing to me was you could not tell the difference between the men and the women carrying the big rucksacks and the huge weapons up that hill. Everyone has the exact same haircut. Everybody's wearing the exact same clothes. There is no rank. And everyone stinks. They have been in the woods for a couple of days at this point. And I probably watched 100 soldiers walk by and could not tell you gender. And so what I would say to you is, looking at Ranger School, it has not changed its standards. It has a 50% attrition rate. It is the premier leadership organization in the world. And I desperately hope my daughter Lila, if she joins, goes to it and is
How old
capable.
is she?
She's 7.
Okay, so she's
got some
a little
years.
time. Throw that rucksack on her right now.
No, we start practicing. And so, but I hope she can pass. I hope she can meet that standard. And I hope if she wants to be in combat arms, then she excels there. But so very specifically to answer your question on recruiting for females, as far as I know, in every single category, including female recruiting, we are up.
You've talked publicly about one of the hardest parts of your job, which is writing letters to the families whose soldiers have died by suicide. You said that the Army has thrown money and talent at the problem, but has not solved it. What are you trying to do that's different?
Of all the things in this job, I just had never processed that it was part of it. When a soldier dies who's active duty, for their parents and their kids and their spouse, I write a letter and hand sign them all and try to hear the stories. And it is horrifying how many of these letters I write every single week.
How many?
I think this week we're probably at, across those different family members, 30.
30 just this week.
And so, because if you think of each soldier and maybe you're touching 6 of their family members, it's like a really terrible exercise. And so what we tried to do a couple of months ago is say, okay, when is the worst time of year that we know soldiers deal with this issue? And it is the it's the same. Yeah. It's the holidays. We actually just signed today and hasn't gone out yet, but it is essentially a letter from me taking the best practice that we have found in the last year. So we have the 11th Airborne out of Alaska. And if you think of living in Alaska, it's very dark and it's very cold and it can be really hard over the holidays. And so we have dealt with this problem up there. And what their amazing leaders have implemented recently is this idea that every single day, every single soldier gets a knock on their door and they get the question, is there anything I can do to help? And this happens at scale up there. And so what we are doing is we are taking that, you can call it an experiment or that best practice, and we are applying it for the next 45 days through the holidays to the entire Army. Every single soldier will have an NCO or an officer reach out to them every single day and ask, how can I help? Do you need any help? And we are going to measure the outcomes from the last couple of years and measure whether this works, and we hope it does. But if it doesn't, we're going to try something else, and we're going to try something else, and we're going to try something else. Because what we have found the problem is we have a ton of resources. We desperately don't want this to continue to occur. We actually spend a lot of money on it, and we're very smart people trying to solve it. And it just hasn't made a difference yet, but we're going to.
Lastly, I do want to ask you about another high-ranking official in the government that also is a veteran that you go way back with, which is Vice President J.D. Vance. Can you give us a little behind the scenes on that relationship and what it's like serving in government together now?
Getting to watch somebody who I've respected for so long. I met him the day before I started law school. He was a year in front of me, and we had the Yale Law Veterans Association, and I think he was the president of it. There were like 6 of us in it. But he took us out for pizza at a local New Haven joint. I won't say which one because I don't want to cause any sort of...
any ruckus.
Yeah, I don't want to cause any rivalries. But we were there, and I'll never forget. He said, you guys are about to do this thing, and you're going to be really self-conscious, and you're going to feel like you don't belong. And you're just going to feel like, because of your experiences, having been out of education for a while, and a lot of people like me went to public school, like, you're just not good enough. And he said, I promise you, just make it like 2 or 3 months, and you will find out that you will belong and you will excel. And that was the very first night I met JD.
Was he right about all of that?
He was absolutely right. Having him out there as a mentor made a huge difference to a lot of us. And then if you look back to him and Usha at the time, I mean, nearly everyone I know, if they were at the school and they were being honest, they would have said, if I had to pick somebody that was going to be vice president at the age of 40, it would be JD or his wife Usha, one or the other, and the other would have supported whichever one was running. And so it has been remarkable to get to watch his rise, and it has been, I'd say very sincerely, the honor of a lifetime to just get to be witness to the change that he and the president are making.
Well, Secretary Driscoll, I have not kept you to military time. I apologize, but thank you so much for taking the time and joining the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. We'll be back next week. If you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, be sure to click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.